So I read how, as you were growing up here, you got into engineering. You actually had your own engineering room that you made. What inspired you to do that? How did you realize this was a path for you?
Um, I just loved music and loved technology, electronics, and sound from when I was a little kid. And when I was in high school, my first job, I worked at a place called Bob Hyatt's Stereo Center on Goodman and Park. Um, and it was a record store, a hi-fi store, and I just loved it. It was just loved, and I just got really fascinated with the idea of making records, or the technology and the art that goes into it. Other than just, I mean, I'm not a musician, so I wasn't playing an instrument, but I was really attuned to the sonic space and how records were created, how the music lived in a space that was created rather than a real acoustic environment in a lot of cases. And I was just really fascinated with that. So I got some equipment, old equipment that was brought in for repair at the stereo store no one wanted, and fixed it up and started this little studio in my parents' basement, usually with a bunch of junk, but it worked. And just recorded local bands and local jingles. That was in 68, 69, 70, around then. And it grew from there. I went in with a few other people in the very early 70s, and we had PCI recording here in Rochester, and that studio grew. We were ended up as a 16-track studio before I left, and just did more of the same. A lot of demos, a lot of local bands, a lot of jingles, and I also at the same time was working for Chuck Mangione doing mostly live sound, which that was sort of a secondary thing. It was something I knew how to do. I didn't really want to do it that much, but to make a living in this business here, I had to have a supplemental job. So I was on the road a lot, and then Chuck took me to L.A. To record. I think it was Chase the Clouds Way album in 1975. He actually asked me, "Do you think you can handle this 45-piece live orchestra in the studio?" And I never did anything like that before, and I thought I would crash and burn, but I wasn't going to say no. So it worked out, and started meeting people in L.A. And our son was born in 1977, so I didn't want to go on the road anymore after that. So we just moved to L.A. in '78 and started. I actually moved there as a tech. Worked first at Larrabee Sound as a tech for a few months, and then started getting recording gigs and mixing gigs, and it just grew from there. Met a lot of people in L.A. and was there till. Did a lot of records there. Worked with Giorgio Moroder quite a bit. Worked with Earth, Wind and Fire a lot on 3 albums. That was probably the most fun part of my career in the early '80s. And worked with Prince a little bit. Worked with Burt Bacharach quite a bit. So really pretty much my career was built in L.A. And then I did a mixed record for Michael Bolton in 1992. We went up to San Francisco, actually Sausalito, to mix that at the record plant, and that was for Sony. Walter Afanasieff was the producer, and Tommy Mottola, who was the CEO of Sony at the time with Sony Music, heard it and liked what I did and hired me to work on Mariah Carey's record, moved me back to New York. And I didn't want to go back to New York. I loved LA, I loved the climate and everything, and then the earthquake hit in '94, and called them up and said, "Hey, is that offer still open? You want to move me to New York?" And so we moved to New York and did a lot of work for Sony there. And then he left Sony, and a lot of the industry moved back to LA, because so much of the industry moved to New York and Nashville after the earthquake. Then LA started becoming the place really where most of the records were made. So we moved back to LA in 2013 and worked quite a bit there. Engineered and mixed Daft Punk Ram album in 2013 when we were back, and that was record of the year and album of the year, and probably the most high-profile thing I've ever worked on. And then just last year, I was still working in LA, and I am still working, but just turned 70, and I don't want to work all the time anymore, LA is very expensive to live in right now, so we moved to Las Vegas. So I'm still close to LA, still in touch with a lot of people. I have a little studio at home, so I do most of my mixing work there, and that's it.
You got it. You got it. Has it been difficult for you to transition from genre to genre?
No, because in most cases, the genre of music, I can enjoy anything as long as it's well done, well played, well produced, and and you find that in every genre. So I really don't have a problem going from one to another.
I'm going to ask you to not be humble for a minute here. What sets your work above others that has continued to attract the attention of top-notch artists?
That I really don't know. I mean, I think I'm probably good at faking it. No, actually, a lot of artists I work with say that, even though I'm not a musician, they say I have a very musical sense and really know how to place things and balance things. And modern records aren't recorded usually with a band in a room. Even if it starts out with a live rhythm section, there's a lot of overdubs, a lot of production of the record, and it's not all put together. You just play it back. And a mixer's job is to really create a space for the music to live in, and just to make everything sound, sound palatable. And I wouldn't always say natural, because a lot of records now are very processed, but just to have an interesting presentation of the music. And that's what I do.
You said you didn't get into music, but what you're describing kind of sounds like, if not an instrument, you're playing a role in that final product.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't know if I would have been a good musician or not. I never really tried. I don't really have the coordination to play something well. You hear these virtuosos, and like, so I just wanted to do something that I'd be good at.
When you are recording in a studio and you are hearing an artist do something special, do you know it in the moment? Do you know that magic is happening while it's happening?
Sometimes. Yeah, I would say the few records I've worked on that have really, some of the records I've worked on that have been really big, and I did notice at the time. First was, did a lot of records with Chuck Mangione, and Feel So Good, that one we knew. That one, I just knew that was going to be something. And then, let's see, Earth, Wind & Fire, did a lot with them. Let's Groove Tonight, I knew was going to be a big record. And the Daft Punk album, I knew was going to be a big record. But there are a lot in the middle. Oh yeah, and also Dionne Warwick, That's What Friends Are For, but how could that not be a big record with her and Elton John and Stevie Wonder and Gladys Knight and all the people that were on that? So of course I knew that was a no-brainer to know that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that have been really big that I didn't really think would be, and there were some that that I thought, wow, this is great, and nothing ever really happened. So there's so many factors involved, the promotion, the visibility of the artist. It's not all just a great record is going to be huge, or a mediocre record is going to just die. It doesn't always work like that.
Yeah. Before all of that, you did get to work with the Mangione brothers. You got to work with Steve Gadd, Tony Levin. Did you know that they were what they were?
I knew they were great musicians. I knew that, Steve and Tony, incredible. I mean, they were, they actually were even down in my basement, my parents' basement a couple times. I think one was, I think it was a jingle, and then they were down, I think this was probably late 60s, maybe 1970. Yeah. They were hired by a guy, Doug Brown, who was with Wilmer Alexander and the Dukes. He was doing a record and hired Steve and Tony, and we did that in my basement. And then of course Chuck is a writer and arranger, incredible, So, and I mean that was very inspiring to work with really good people early on. Used to record a band called the Infirmary down there. That was Lou Graham's early band, like way before Foreigner. Yeah, so they were in my basement a lot, and so I mean there was a lot of great people coming out of Rochester, and that I got to work with, and there was also, one of the reasons I got out of there was a lot of bad stuff going on here too, and like the really great sessions and great musicians when they working in Rochester were in the studio anyways were sort of few and far between, and it was just, you know, got to get out to LA, got to, you know, got to work on stuff I like. And I was lucky because I got, even when I was at working as a tech at Larrabee, my first mix I did, which wasn't really a record, maybe it was released as a record later, but it was a tribute to Berry Gordy from all the Motown artists. And since it was supposed to be a tribute and not a record, they, you know, I got to mix it. They didn't get a famous guy. So it was a song called Pops, We Love You, and it had all the Motown artists on it. This was in 78, 79. And that sort of helped start. And then I got to do a record for Glenn Campbell called Highwayman back then too. Oh, yeah. So I was, you know, wasn't working as a tech very long. But you know, being a tech sort of helped me in my career twice. You know, one building the studio in my parents' basement, and then, you know, sort of as a springboard when I got out to LA.
Do you have trouble listening to music now, just as a regular listener? I mean, knowing that you can pick apart everything that's kind of happening?
No, I mean, I still enjoy it. I don't listen as much as I used to. I used to, I mean, I used to listen all my waking hours to different stuff, but I don't as much anymore because, you know, I've spent so many years working on it. I still enjoy music, and I just don't connect with a lot of the newest, mostly synthesized music. You know, it's been, you know, synthesized pop music that's been popular lately. It's because, excuse me, I'm an old fart, so I like at least where there was a live rhythm section in the session. But
the technology within your field has changed so dramatically over the last 40 or 50 years. How did you stay on top of it?
I've always been interested in technology, so I mean, that's something that I always stayed on top of. I mean, it's entirely different now than it was when I started. Tape, some people use tape, you know, I would say some people like the sound of it, but I think it's more nostalgia. Everything's in the computer now and software. Recording acoustic instruments and bands is, you know, pretty much the same with you know, microphones into preamps and console, but now it's all done in the computer and all recorded into software and then manipulated there, which I sort of like because it enables you to have a home studio. You don't need a huge air conditioner and a huge room and separate power and everything to run a studio now. Now it's pretty much, I'm using my laptop for everything. I have, in my studio, I have a mixing board because I like, you know, being old-fashioned, I like to have faders. I don't like to use a mouse and to manipulate sounds. I like to have the physical controls mainly because you can operate more than one thing at a time. And I think an important aspect of mixing is when you're concentrating on an instrument or vocal, it's not just that, it's interaction with the rest of the band, the rest of the recording. So having faders, you can adjust that and simultaneously hear how it's working as you change other things. And that's why I need to work with physical faders. But now these control surfaces just connect to the computer and control the software. So you're achieving the same thing, but in technologically a much different way.
I'm going to ask two more questions. One, I'm going to have you weigh in on the vinyl debate. Is listening to a record to you the best way to listen to music?
It depends. It's not, I wouldn't say that vinyl is a better medium. I think that because in digital recording, CDs, not going to say MP3s as much because that's a lot of data compression. You do lose some fidelity with that. But the thing is with CDs and digital recordings, you know exactly where the limits are. And a lot of people push everything right up to the limit and lose dynamics because everything's like loud all the time. And even though the medium has the capability of great dynamic range. Now in vinyl you have much less dynamic range, and to me the big problem with vinyl is that as you get towards the end of the record, toward the label, the velocity of the groove against the stylus is much slower. Records turning at a constant RPM, And so there's much more groove going past the stylus at the beginning of a record than at the end. And the fidelity really decreases in vinyl at the end. And also it doesn't last very many plays. But the outer grooves of a vinyl record and a good digital recording can sound pretty much the same, I would think. And there's a certain thing with vinyl that it's, there's a little bit of viscosity to the material, so the groove doesn't exactly follow it, and it's, it can sort of round off the edges of high frequency waves a little bit, which is in some ways very pleasant, where a digital recording wouldn't do that. But it all depends on the program material, because if something's very well recorded and sounds good, the digital recording is going to be a more accurate representation. And if something's a little bit off, vinyl is very forgiving, at least around the outer grooves.
That was by far more than I had hoped for that answer. That was awesome.
When you do this for 15 years, you learn this stuff.
Last question. What does it feel like to be honored to enter the Rochester Musical Hall of Fame?
It feels great. I feel really honored, you know, because I started out here. I like it here. I probably would have stayed here if I did, you know, if there was a, you know, if there was a way to have a career in this here. And I'm like so grateful to Eastman School of Music, because in the late 60s they used to have a course there called Recording Workshop in the summers. And Phil Ramone, who I'm sure everybody knows was a great producer, he came up from New York and taught the course for 3 weeks each summer. You know, I went to it for I think 3 times, 3 years, and it was amazing. I mean, it was just, I was always interested, loved to do it before. I had my little studio in my parents' basement before the course, but I mean, that just really clinched it. I wanted to do this, and the knowledge I got from him and the people he brought with him, and just the way of interacting with a session and with the musicians and producers, and really handling a session, that knowledge was so invaluable to me. And so I thank Eastman for that. I don't know what all these recording courses are in other schools now and everything, but this was the real deal.